capital punishment in the United Kingdom was used from ancient times until the second half of the 20th century. The last executions in the United Kingdom were by hanging, and took place in 1964, before capital punishment was suspended for murder in 1965, and finally abolished for murder in 1969. Although unused, the death penalty remained a legally defined punishment for certain offenses such as treason until it was completely abolished in 1998. In 2004, the 13th Protocol to the European Convention on Human Rights became binding on the United Kingdom, prohibiting the restoration of the death penalty for as long as the UK is a party to the convention. In 1965, the Labour MP, Sidney Silverman, who had committed himself to the cause of abolition for longer than 20 years, introduced a private member's bill to suspend the death penalty for murder. It was passed on a free vote in the House of Commons by 200 votes to 98. The bill was subsequently passed by the House of Lords by 204 votes to 104. Silverman was opposed in the general election 1966, in the Nelson and Ken constituency, by Patrick Downey, the uncle of Leslie Ann Downey, a victim in the Moors murders case, who stood on an explicitly pro-hanging platform. Downey polled over 5,000 votes, 13.7%, then the largest vote for a genuinely independent candidate since 1945. No individual was the last person hanged in the United Kingdom, as the last executions took place at the same time but at different prisons. Peter Anthony Allen, at Liverpool, and Gwyn Owen Evans, at Manchester prisons. Both were hanged on the 13th of August 1964. Subsequent people were sentenced to death, but they were all reprieved. John Allen West was a 53-year-old laundry van driver of Workington, Cumbria, England. His murder on the 7th of April 1964 was to lead to the last executions in Britain. John West, who lived alone, had returned to his home on the 6th of April 1964. At about 3 a.m. the following morning, his next-door neighbor was awoken by a noise in West's house and, looking out of the window, observed a car disappearing down the street. The neighbor called the police, who found West dead from severe head injuries, and a stab wound to the chest. In his house, the police found a raincoat with a medallion and an army memo form in its pockets. The medallion was inscribed G.O. Evans, July, 1961, and the memo form had the name Norma O'Brien on it, together with a Liverpool address. Norma O'Brien was a 17-year-old Liverpool factory worker who told the police that in 1963, while staying with her sister and brother-in-law in Preston, she had met a man called Ginger Owen Evans. She also confirmed that she had seen Evans wearing the medallion. 48 hours after West's murder, Gwyn Owen Evans, he was born on the 1st of April 1940, and Peter Anthony Allen, born the 4th of April 1943. Both were arrested and charged with the crime. Evans lodged with Allen and his wife in Preston, and was also found to have a watch inscribed to West in his pocket. Both had criminal records. Although Evans blamed Allen for beating West, he admitted to stealing the watch, and under further questioning it became clear that he had masterminded the whole incident. In his turn, Allen stated that they had stolen a car in Preston and driven over to West's house so that Evans could borrow some money from his one-time workmate. When Allen and Evans were tried together at Manchester Crown Court in June 1964, the charge against them was capital murder, because West's murder had been committed in the course of theft. During the trial, the judge asked the jury to decide if the murder had actually been committed by one of the two men alone, in which case the other would only be found guilty of non-capital murder at the most. The jury instead found both men equally guilty, and both were sentenced to death by hanging. Gwyn Owen Evans was hanged by the executioner Harry Allen at Manchester's Strangeways prison at 8 a.m. on the 13th of August 1964. At the same time, Peter Allen was hanged at Liverpool's Walton prison by Robert Leslie Stewart. Were the final two hangings in Britain. At 8 o'clock on the 13th of August 1964, two gallows traps 50 kilometers apart opened simultaneously, dropping the last two men England ever hanged. Gwyn Owen Evans and Peter Anthony Allen couldn't have been much smaller fare for a milestone as momentous as the last entry in England's copious annals of execution. Both men had dropped by Evans's former co-worker's place in the aptly named Port Workington to borrow money. Since the call was at 3 a.m. and the petitioners were armed, it might appear that they had in mind an offer that John Allen West couldn't refuse. A quarrel, a murder, a stolen watch, a medallion dropped at the crime scene with one of the prep's own names on it. 3 months later, they were on trial for their lives. A month after that, hanged by the neck until dead. If there is tragedy in these hapless thugs, it may be that either could possibly have saved the other by claiming sole responsibility for the murder. Since each blamed the other, the jury ended up finding them equally culpable. While the last hangings in Canada featured two unconnected men hanged together, the last in England had partners in crime hanged separately. Allen died at Liverpool's Walton prison. Evans was dropped at Manchester's Strangeways prison. And unlike the Canadian case, Evans and Allen didn't die knowing they were likely the last. Although hangings had slowed to a crawl in Britain, there were just two in 1963, and none in 1964 before the executions of Gwyn and Allen. Death sentences continued to be handed down. But the trend was toward abolition. The British Parliament suspended the death penalty for ordinary crimes late in 1965, and made the suspension permanent in 1969. The handful of exceptional crimes for which the gallows remained nominally available, treason, piracy, espionage, were never enforced as such before those statutes too were removed from the hangman's jurisdiction by 1998. Evans' executioner, Harry Allen, no relation to Peter Anthony Allen, also conducted the last hanging in Scotland. Gwyn Owen Evans was 24 at the time of his execution, and Peter Anthony Allen was 21 at the time of his execution. Hanging Judge Isaac Parker presided over the executions, which were held at Fort Smith. Thank you for watching Death Row.